Across 17,000 star systems, the Galactic Biological Archive hummed with the collected genetic information of every sentient species, every predator, every microbe worth cataloging. It was, by all accounts, the most comprehensive database of life in the known universe, a monument to scientific achievement that had taken 3 millennia to compile. The system was so robust, so utterly complete, that failures simply did not occur. When something biological existed, the archive knew about it. When it didn't know about something, well, that thing didn't exist. Simple mathematics, really, which made the current situation on Frontier World Delta 7 approximately as comfortable as swallowing broken glass. Dr. Velthix, whose name translated poorly into most languages and sounded like gargling gravel in others, stared at the holographic display with all 4 of his primary eyes, while his secondary pair blinked in what could only be described as aggressive disbelief. The genetic sample floated before him in crystalline suspension, mocking him with its very existence. "Run it again," he said, his mandibles clicking in irritation. His assistant, a young Fraxian whose enthusiasm had not yet been ground down by decades of scientific disappointment, tapped the console with her tentacle. "Doctor, we have run it 47 times. The results remain consistent." "Consistent with what? Nonsense?" Velthix circled the sample container, as if viewing it from a different angle might somehow make the genetic code decide to cooperate. "This is impossible. The archive contains genetic markers from every documented species in the explored galaxy. Every single one." The assistant pulled up a secondary screen, her bioluminescent spots flickering nervously. "The DNA structure itself is coherent. Double helix, protein encoding, all standard molecular biology. But the specific sequences, the genetic markers, the evolutionary signatures, none of it matches anything in our database, not even partial matches, not even distant cousins 3 times removed." Velthix made a sound somewhere between a sigh and a hiss. They had discovered the sample 3 days ago during a routine ecological survey of Delta 7's northern continent. The planet itself was unremarkable, a standard Class M world with the usual assortment of hostile flora, territorial fauna, and weather patterns that seemed personally offended by the presence of research equipment. The team had been collecting environmental DNA from water sources, a standard procedure that usually revealed nothing more interesting than which local predators had been drinking upstream. Instead, they had found this, a genetic ghost. Something that, according to every scientific principle they understood, should not exist. "What about contamination?" Velthix asked, grasping at the tattered remains of rational explanation. "Laboratory error? Equipment malfunction?" "Tested and eliminated. The sample is clean, the equipment is calibrated, and doctor, there is something else." The assistant manipulated the display, bringing up a map of the surrounding area. Red markers dotted the landscape like a rash. "Predator activity has increased 700% in the sector where we found the sample." Velthix's antennae straightened. 700? Multiple species, apex predators that normally avoid each other. They are converging on a location approximately 15 kilometers from our collection site. She expanded the map, highlighting thermal signatures and movement patterns. "The behavioral algorithms cannot explain it. These species should be competing, not cooperating, yet they all seem to be tracking something." "Tracking our mystery creature," Velthix said slowly, the implications crawling up his exoskeleton like ice. "Whatever left this DNA is still out there, and every predator in the region knows it." The assistant's spots flickered faster now, betraying her anxiety. "The frontier research protocols are clear about unidentified species, especially potentially dangerous ones. We should report this to the Archive Council and await instructions." Velthix looked at the DNA sample, then at the map of predator movements, then back at the sample. Every instinct developed over 40 years of xenobiology screamed that something was terribly, fascinatingly wrong. The Archive Council would take months to authorize an investigation. Months of committees and risk assessments and bureaucratic theater, while whatever left this genetic signature was being hunted by every predator with teeth, claws, or venomous appendages. "Prepare the field survey equipment," he said finally. "Full hazard protocols. If predators are this interested in our unknown species, we need to find it first." "Doctor, the regulations." "The regulations," Velthix interrupted, his mandibles spreading in what might have been a smile if one were feeling generous, "were written by individuals who never had to explain how something simultaneously exists and does not exist. I refuse to be the scientist who discovered an impossibility and then filed the proper paperwork while it was eaten. Prepare the equipment." The assistant hesitated, her training warring with her curiosity. Curiosity won, as it usually did with scientists worth their salt. "What do we tell the rest of the team?" Velthix studied the DNA structure one more time, watching the double helix rotate in its suspension field. Somewhere out there in Delta 7's wilderness, something was running for its life from creatures that could disembowel an armored transport. Something that left behind genetic evidence the entire galaxy's scientific establishment could not identify. Something that, by all rights, should not exist. "Tell them to pack for a rescue mission," he said, "and to bring the weapons. Heavy ones." The assistant moved to comply, then paused at the laboratory door. "Doctor, what if this creature is dangerous? What if—" "There is a reason predators are hunting it." Velthix considered this. On Delta 7, the food chain was brutally straightforward. Predators hunted prey. Prey ran. The ecosystem maintained balance through violence and consumption, as ecosystems tended to do when nobody was watching. If every major predator in the region was tracking this creature with such singular focus, it suggested something extraordinary. Either it was prey so valuable that territorial instincts were being overridden, or it was something else entirely. "An excellent question," Velthix said, powering down the display. "Let us hope we arrive in time to ask it." As the laboratory emptied and the team prepared for their unauthorized expedition into Delta 7's increasingly hostile wilderness, the DNA sample remained in its suspension field, still refusing to match anything in the Galactic Biological Archive, still existing in defiance of every system designed to catalog life in the known universe. Still very much belonging to something that was currently running for its life through alien terrain, with no backup, no identification, and no idea that 17,000 star systems worth of scientific infrastructure was about to experience a philosophical crisis because of its genome. The archive hummed on, confident in its completeness, blissfully unaware that somewhere on a frontier world, a creature it had never heard of was about to make xenobiologists question everything they thought they knew about life in the galaxy, which was, really, exactly the kind of chaos that made frontier research worth the hazard pay. The thing about apex predators, Velthix reflected as he watched 3 separate species circle the same clearing without immediately murdering each other, was that they were supposed to have territorial instincts. Emphasis on supposed to. The Rathax pack, with their 6-legged gait and teeth designed to crack battle armor, should have been ripping into the solitary cleach that prowled the perimeter. The cleach, an ambush predator roughly the size of a small transport and sporting claws that could open bulkheads, should have been defending its hunting ground with extreme prejudice. Instead, they were working together, not cooperating in any meaningful sense, but certainly not competing. They moved with parallel purpose, like attendees at the world's most violent conference, all tracking the same scent trail deeper into Delta 7's red-leaved forest. "This is not normal behavior," the assistant said, her spots flickering so rapidly they were practically strobing. "This violates every predator competition model in the xenobiology database." "Yes, thank you. I am aware that nature is currently ignoring its own rules," Velthix muttered, adjusting the scanner array. "What I would like to know is why." The research team had been tracking the predator convergence for 6 hours now, maintaining a careful distance and employing every stealth measure in their arsenal. The mobile lab hummed quietly on its anti-grav cushion, sensors extended like nervous antennae, while the team inside tried very hard not to think about what would happen if the predators decided scientists looked appetizing. A junior researcher, his scales pale with anxiety, highlighted a section of ground on the holographic map. "Doctor, we have found something. Tracks." Velthix moved to the display. There, captured in thermal imaging and enhanced resolution, were impressions in the soft earth. Bipedal. Relatively small, perhaps 70 kilograms based on the depth and spacing. 5 digits on each foot, suggesting grasping capability. The stride pattern indicated upright locomotion, inefficient for speed, but excellent for manipulating tools. "Tool user," Velthix said, his scientific mind cataloging details even as his survival instincts screamed about the nearby predators. "Intelligent, or at least clever. Look at the gait pattern, how it varies. Not just running, thinking about where to step." "The tracks lead directly through Cliche territory," another researcher observed. "Either it does not know, or it does not care." Or, the assistant added quietly, it had no choice. They followed the trail, the mobile lab gliding silently over terrain that alternated between rocky outcrops and dense vegetation. The predators had passed through hours earlier, leaving their own marks. Claw gouges on trees, disturbed earth where something large had crouched, waiting. The ecosystem itself seemed to hold its breath, smaller creatures having fled or hidden from the sudden influx of apex predators. Then they found the shelter. Calling it shelter was generous. A rock overhang, barely sufficient to protect from rain, its entrance partially blocked by branches that had been deliberately arranged. Not woven, not engineered, just positioned with the kind of practical intelligence that spoke to problem-solving under pressure. "Primitive tool use," Velthix said, examining the branch placement. "Whoever our mystery being is, they understand basic concepts of concealment and defense." The junior researcher corrected, pointing to the ground. "Look." The earth around the shelter had been torn apart. Multiple predator tracks overlapped, converging on the hiding spot. Claw marks scarred the rock face. Several branches had been snapped and scattered. The scene painted a clear picture. The predators had found the shelter, investigated it thoroughly, and then continued their pursuit when they discovered their quarry had already fled. "How long ago?" Velthix asked. The assistant consulted her scanner. "Based on thermal decay and soil compression patterns, approximately 4 hours. The prey abandoned this position well before the predators arrived." "Meaning it knew they were coming." Velthix's antennae twitched. "It anticipated the pursuit and relocated. That is not prey behavior, that is tactics." They pressed on, following the trail deeper into territory that made their sensors emit increasingly unhappy warning tones. The evidence accumulated like pieces of a fascinating, terrifying puzzle. A stream where the tracks disappeared, suggesting the creature had waded through water to break its scent trail. A tree with fresh sap bleeding from a wound 15 meters up, indicating climbing capability. A small cache of local tubers, partially eaten and then buried, demonstrating knowledge of which native plants were edible and which would cause digestive apocalypse. "Doctor," the assistant said, her voice tight, "the predator concentration ahead is reaching critical levels. We should retreat." Velthix knew she was right. The scanner showed at least 7 distinct thermal signatures converging on a location 2 kilometers ahead. 7 apex predators, in proximity, all tracking the same target. It was the kind of scenario that appeared in cautionary training videos about what not to do on frontier worlds. But retreating meant losing the trail. It meant abandoning whatever creature had left that impossible DNA to its fate. It meant returning to the lab with nothing but questions and the uncomfortable certainty that something was very wrong with their supposedly comprehensive database. 1 more kilometer, Velthix decided. We maintain maximum stealth protocols. At the first sign of predator awareness, we retreat immediately. They advanced with the kind of creeping dread usually reserved for horror entertainment. The forest around them had gone silent, that peculiar quiet that meant dangerous things were moving, and every sensible creature had decided elsewhere looked lovely this time of year. The mobile lab's sensors painted a picture of controlled chaos ahead, predators positioning themselves in what looked disturbingly like coordinated hunting patterns. Then the assistant froze, her tentacle hovering over the scanner controls. Doctor, thermal signature, bipedal, small, matches the track parameters. It is directly ahead, approximately 800 meters. Life signs? Elevated heart rate, increased respiration, exhausted but still mobile. She paused, manipulating the display. Doctor, it is not running anymore. It has stopped moving. A chill that had nothing to do with Delta 7's temperature ran through Velthix's exoskeleton. Prey stopped running for two reasons. Either it had given up, accepting its fate with whatever dignity exhaustion allowed, or it had decided running was no longer the optimal survival strategy. "Can we get a visual?" he asked. The assistant routed the forward cameras, filtering through the dense vegetation. The image that resolved on their screens made several researchers emit sounds of confusion. Their mystery creature stood in a small clearing, back against a rock formation that eliminated approach from behind. Its posture was upright, bipedal, just as the tracks had suggested. But what stopped Velthix's primary and secondary hearts was what the creature was holding. Not claws, not natural weapons. Tools. A sturdy branch, sharpened to a point using rocks that lay scattered at its feet. Several smaller projectiles arranged within easy reach, each weighted and balanced, and most telling of all, a primitive sling fashioned from some fibrous plant material already loaded and ready. "It is not running because it has decided to fight," Velthix said slowly. "That creature, hunted by 7 apex predators, has chosen to make a stand." "That is insane," the junior researcher breathed. "It will be torn apart." The assistant pulled up a full behavioral analysis, her spots flickering with scientific fascination despite the circumstances. "Wait. Look at the positioning. The rock eliminates rear approach. The clearing offers visibility in all directions. Those projectiles are arranged for rapid access. It is not just fighting. It has prepared." On their screens, the first predator entered the clearing. A Rathax, low to the ground, teeth bared. The creature watched it approach, making no sound, simply adjusting its grip on the sharpened branch. The predator circled, testing, looking for weakness. The creature's arm moved with sudden violence. The sling whipped forward, launching a rock with enough force to crack against the Rathax's skull. The predator yelped, stumbling back, more surprised than injured. But the surprise was enough. In the seconds of confusion, the creature had already reloaded, already positioned itself to face the next threat. "By the archive," Velthix whispered. "It is not just fighting, it is winning." More predators emerged from the tree line, drawn by the commotion. The clearing became a chaos of movement, teeth and claws. And in the center, that small bipedal figure, exhausted and outmatched, and absolutely refusing to die quietly, turned what should have been a massacre into something that looked disturbingly like a negotiation conducted through violence. The research team watched, sensors recording everything, as their impossible mystery creature demonstrated exactly why it had survived long enough to leave DNA samples in the first place. Not through superior strength or natural weapons, but through something the predators clearly had not anticipated. Spite, creativity, and an apparently terminal case of refusing to accept basic predator-prey dynamics. The Rathax pack made their fatal mistake when they assumed exhaustion meant defeat. They circled closer, coordinating their approach with the kind of pack intelligence that had made them Delta 7's most successful hunters. What they failed to account for was that their prey had been studying them for 3 days, learning their patterns, understanding their timing. The creature moved before the pack leader did, A rock from the sling caught the alpha directly in its third eye, the one predators relied on for depth perception. Half blind and furious, it charged, which was exactly what the creature wanted. The sharpened branch, planted firmly in the ground at an angle, caught the Velthix mid-leap. Physics and momentum did the rest. Velthix watched through the scanner as the remaining predators hesitated. Hesitation was not part of their behavioral programming. Apex predators did not reconsider, yet there they stood, watching their pack leader thrash and bleed, recalculating the cost-benefit analysis of this particular meal. The Cliche, operating on different evolutionary programming, decided caution was for creatures with functional survival instincts. It lunged from the side, claws extended, aiming to end this irritating interruption to its hunting schedule. The creature rolled, not away but toward, inside the arc of those massive claws. Something glinted in its hand, a shard of rock napped to a cutting edge. The Cliche's roar became a shriek as the improvised blade found the soft tissue behind its foreleg, severing something important. It stumbled, crashing into two other predators who had been positioning for their own attacks. "It is using them against each other," the assistant breathed, "turning their numbers into a disadvantage." The clearing descended into chaos. Predators, now wounded and angry, began snapping at each other as much as at their intended prey. Territorial instincts, temporarily suppressed by the lure of unusual game, reasserted themselves with violence. The creature, bleeding from a dozen cuts but still mobile, used the confusion to retreat to a better position, already gathering more projectiles. A younger Velthix, either braver or stupider than its packmates, made one final attempt. The creature's sling spoke again, this time loaded with something that had been heating in a small fire. The burning projectile struck the predator's snout, and the yelp of pain echoed through the forest. That was apparently the final straw. The remaining predators, faced with an opponent that fought with fire and refused to die properly, made the wise decision that dinner elsewhere sounded lovely. They retreated into the tree line, leaving their dead and wounded, leaving the clearing to a creature that should have been prey but had somehow neglected to read that particular script. The creature stood alone, shaking with exhaustion and adrenaline, surrounded by evidence that sometimes, just sometimes, the food chain worked in reverse. Velthix made the decision that would haunt xenobiology conferences for the next decade. He activated the mobile lab's external speakers and broadcast in standard Galactic. "Please do not throw rocks at us. We are researchers, not predators." The creature spun, weapon raised, then froze. Its eyes widened in what Velthix desperately hoped was recognition rather than pre-attack assessment. After a moment that aged everyone in the lab several years, it lowered the branch. "You speak standard?" Velthix asked, emerging from the lab with all four hands raised in what he prayed was a universal gesture of non-aggression. "Picked up some phrases from my ship's database before it became a very expensive crater," the creature said, its voice rough with exhaustion. "You folks mind explaining why your planet's database forgot Earth exists?" Earth. The word meant nothing to Velthix's translator, which meant it meant nothing to the Galactic Archive, which meant approximately 17,000 star systems worth of documentation had somehow missed an entire planet producing tool-using bipeds who fought apex predators with rocks and spite. "Your world is not in our records," Velthix admitted, scanning the creature properly now. The genetic markers resolved, confirming what his increasingly panicked scientific intuition already knew. This was a human, from a planet called Earth, and the archive had absolutely no idea humanity existed. "Well, that explains the welcome committee," the human said, prodding a dead Velthix with his boot. "Thought the locals were just unfriendly." The assistant was already running projections, her spots flickering in what Velthix recognized as scientific horror. "Doctor, if this species evolved persistence hunting, tool use, and social cooperation as survival mechanisms, and our database has no record of them, then every species in the galaxy is about to learn that somewhere out there is a planet full of creatures who consider being hunted by apex predators a minor inconvenience," Velthix finished. The human, now identified but somehow more mysterious than before, looked at the carnage around him and shrugged. Could have been worse. At least your predators give up. Back home, we have creatures that hunt for sport. Velthix made a note to recommend Earth be classified as a quarantine world. Not to protect the galaxy from humans, but because he genuinely feared what humanity would do to the galactic ecosystem if they ever figured out that most alien predators were, by Earth standards, disappointingly quittable. The archive hummed on, now updated with one additional species. The update came with a warning label. Nobody quite knew what the label should say, so they settled on, "Approach with extreme caution and low expectations of cooperation." Somewhere, the universe laughed. 3 months after Delta 7, the Galactic Biological Archive experienced what historians would diplomatically call an administrative adjustment, and what everyone else called that time we discovered we were idiots. The human, whose name was apparently as unpronounceable to most species as Velthix's was to him, had been transported to a proper research facility where xenobiologists lined up to ask increasingly uncomfortable questions about Earth's evolutionary history. The answers did not improve anyone's mood. Earth, it turned out, was a nightmare factory disguised as a garden world. Humans had not evolved alongside their predators. They had evolved because of them, developing persistence hunting that let them literally chase prey until it died of exhaustion. They had climbed to the top of their food chain without claws, venom, or natural armor, using only pattern recognition, teamwork, and a frankly disturbing ability to throw objects with lethal accuracy. Your species domesticated wolves, one researcher said, reviewing the data with the kind of expression normally reserved for discovering your coffee was actually poison. You turned apex predators into pets. Some of them are very good dogs, the human replied unhelpfully. The Archive Council met in emergency session to determine how an entire sentient species had escaped documentation. The answer, when it finally emerged from layers of bureaucratic archaeology, was simultaneously simple and infuriating. Earth's solar system had been flagged as pending survey approximately 12,000 years ago and then forgotten during a database migration. Humanity had gone from stone tools to interstellar travel in the time it took galactic bureaucracy to schedule a follow-up appointment. Velthix, now somewhat famous for discovering the species everyone else had overlooked, submitted his official report with appropriate scientific detachment. Privately, he included a note suggesting that Earth be monitored carefully, not because humans were dangerous in the traditional sense, but because they had survived their own planet's attempt to kill them, and apparently considered that character building. The human eventually returned home, his ship repaired, carrying stories about his exciting vacation fighting alien monsters. Earth's governments received formal contact from the Galactic Council, which went about as smoothly as expected, which is to say it did not go smoothly at all. And somewhere in the archive's infinite database, humanity's entry sat with its warning label, a monument to the universe's occasional habit of forgetting to mention the really important things until someone nearly got eaten by them. The galaxy had survived the revelation that humans existed. Whether humans would survive discovering the galaxy was an entirely different question, one that several species were suddenly very interested in not answering.